My name is Brooke Ellison and I am 32 years old. 2 weeks ago, my family sat me down at my parents' dinner table and told me that my younger brother was going to be taking control of my retirement. Not asking, telling. My mother said it the way you'd announce a change to the Thanksgiving menu. My brother already had a folder open with my name printed on the tab. My father nodded along like he always does, half a second behind whatever my mother decides. For 32 years, I was the careful one. The responsible one, the one who started saving before anyone else in my family even understood what a retirement account was. And the thanks I got was a room full of people who raised me deciding that the future I built with my own 2 hands was a family asset to be handed to my brother because, and I am quoting my mother here, he is good with big decisions. I sat there with my fork in my hand and I counted to 5 before I said a word, because if I had opened my mouth in that first second, I would have said something I could never take back. Here's what none of them knew yet. My phone was buzzing face down on the table the entire time. And when I finally turned it over later that night, I found out exactly what good with big decisions actually meant. Before we go any further, if a family ever decided your life was theirs to run, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. This is Blueberry Revenge, and this is the kind of story we tell here, the quiet ones. The ones where the person everybody underestimated turns out to be the only one who was paying attention. And while you are down there, drop your age and the town you are watching from in the comments. I genuinely want to know who is sitting with me tonight because I think a lot of you have lived some version of this, and I want you to know you are not the only one. Now let me take you back to that Sunday dinner, because that is where the trap snapped shut and I did not even hear it click. My parents live in Salem in the same brick house I grew up in, the one with the crooked porch step my father has been promising to fix since the Clinton administration. Sunday dinner has been a standing appointment my whole life, so when my mother called and asked me to come, I did not think twice. I drove over with a bottle of the cider my dad likes and a head full of nothing in particular. The first thing I noticed when I walked in was that the table was wrong. There were no serving dishes in the middle. No steam, no smell of pot roast, nothing on the stove. Instead, there was a stack of papers at the head of the table and a laptop, and my brother Tyler sitting in front of both of them with his sleeves rolled up like a man about to run a meeting. His wife Danielle was beside him, looking at her hands. And across from Tyler in the seat where company usually sat was a woman I had not seen in years, Priya. An old friend of my late aunt's, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who notices when a story does not add up. My mother kissed my cheek and steered me to a chair like a hostess seating a guest. I said, "Where is dinner?" In a minute, my mother said, "We just want to talk first, as a family." Tyler slid the folder an inch toward the center of the table, the way you'd present a gift you were proud of. On the tab in block letters was a single word, my name, Brooke. So he said, "Here is the plan. We pull together everything you have got scattered around. The county pension, the IRA, all of it. I take the wheel on the whole thing, and you finally get to stop stressing about money." "I am not stressed," I said. He smiled at the table. "See? That is the stress talking." And they laughed. My mother laughed. My father laughed. Even the air in that room seemed to laugh, and I felt something cold settle into my chest, because in my family, when everybody laughs at the same moment, it usually means they have already had the real conversation without you. I set my bottle of cider down on the table. I looked at the folder with my name on it, thick, far too thick for a man who was supposedly only just now offering to help. I said, "What exactly is in the folder, Tyler?" "Details," he said. "Boring stuff. You do not need to worry about the details. That is the whole point of me doing this." My mother reached over and patted my arm the way you pat a child who is about to make a scene at a wedding. "He is good with big decisions, sweetheart," she said. "You have always been so emotional about money. Let your brother carry this one for you." I did not answer her. I was looking at the woman across the table, Priya, who had not touched her water and had not laughed, and who was watching my brother's mouth move the way you watch a magician's hands. She set her glass down. The sound of it on the wood was small, but the whole table heard it. And she said in a perfectly calm voice, "Why does he keep speaking for her?" My brother's smile froze right there on his face, halfway through whatever he was about to say next. And I knew, sitting in that chair in the house I grew up in, that the next 10 minutes were going to change everything. I left that dinner before anyone cut a single slice of anything, and I drove home with the radio off my hands at 10 and 2, my bottle of cider still sitting unopened on their counter where I had set it down. I live about 20 minutes outside Salem, up where the streetlights give out and the foothills start. By the time I turned onto my road, the fog had come down off the hills, the way it does most evenings out here, soft and gray, swallowing the fence posts one by one. My headlights caught the edge of my porch, the vegetable bed beside it, the little bungalow I bought 4 years ago and paid off 2 years early because I could not stand the idea of owing a bank anything longer than I had to. I want you to understand something about that house because it is the whole reason the rest of this story matters. It is not much. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that has not been updated since the 70s, a wood stove that throws more smoke than heat until you learn its moods. But it is mine, every board of it. There is no landlord, no mortgage, no man on the other end of a phone who can take it from me if I have a bad month. I grew up in a family where money was always somebody else's emergency, where the answer to every question was a sigh and a number we did not have. And I decided somewhere around the age of 19 that I was never going to live like that. So I worked, I saved, I read the fine print other people throw away. I built a quiet little life that did not need anyone's permission to keep going. My grandfather would have understood that house better than anyone in my family ever did. Walt Ellison spent 40 years in the timber country east of Eugene, the kind of man whose hands looked like they had been carved out of the same wood he cut. He raised my father in a house with a dirt cellar and a single light bulb in the kitchen, and the one thing he said to me more than any other every summer I spent out at his place by the Mackenzie River was the same 6 words, "Oh no man, your Sunday kiddo." I did not understand it as a child. I thought he meant something about church. He did not. He meant that the day a man owes you money, he owns a piece of your week, and you should arrange your whole life so that no one ever holds that piece of you. I built that bungalow on those 6 words. I built everything on them. So when I got inside that night before I even took my coat off, I did the thing I always do when my chest feels tight. I went to the kitchen drawer and I took out my notebook. It is nothing fancy. A spiral notebook, 99 cents, the kind a kid takes to school. But every contribution I have ever made to my retirement is written in there in my own hand in ink by date, every raise. Every extra $100 I scraped off a tax refund. I have logged my whole future in that notebook line by line the way my grandfather used to log every cord of wood he sold. People at work think it is a quirk. It is not a quirk. It is the only proof I have ever needed that I built something out of nothing. I sat at my kitchen table, and I turned to the most recent page, and I looked at the number at the bottom, and I tried to make my hands stop wanting to shake. Because here is the thing about that folder Tyler had with my name on it. I had been saving since I was 23. I had done it alone without a single dollar of help from anyone who shared my last name. And the first time my family showed any real interest in that money was the exact moment it became worth taking. It was not the first time either. That was what kept circling back to me at the table. When I was 12, I had a coffee can, a red Folgers can with the plastic lid, and I kept it on my dresser, and every birthday and every chore and every dollar a relative slipped me went into that can. By the time I was 12, I had almost $90 in there, which to a 12-year-old is the same as $1 million. And one afternoon I came home from school, and the can was light. I shook it, and a couple of quarters rattled around the bottom, and that was all. My mother was at the stove. I asked her where my money went, and she did not even turn around. She said Tyler needed new hockey skates, and the registration was due, and we were a little short. You weren't using it, Brooke. It was just sitting there. You weren't using it. It was just sitting there. I have heard some version of that sentence my whole life, about my time, about my car, about my house when they needed a place for a cousin to stay. And now 20 years later I was sitting in my own kitchen, realizing they were about to say it about my entire future. That is the part nobody warns you about with a family like mine. The taking does not feel like robbery. It feels like dinner. It feels like love with a hand in your pocket. I was still sitting there with the notebook open when my phone lit up on the table, a number I half recognized. I let it ring twice while I decided whether I had the energy, and then I answered. Danielle's voice was low, almost a whisper. "Brooke, are you alone?" "I am always alone, Danielle," I said. "That is apparently the family's biggest concern." There was a pause. In the background, I could hear the murmur of Tyler's television, the canned laughter of whatever he watches at night, and I pictured her standing in some other room of their house with her hand cupped around the phone. "I should not be calling you," she said. I saw something on Tyler's laptop, and I don't think you're supposed to know yet." "Know what I said?" Another pause. The TV laughed at something. Danielle did not. "That had already started," she said. I sat very still. My eyes went to the phone in my own hand, to the bank notification banner I had ignored all through dinner, the one that had been buzzing face down on my parents' table, while my brother explained how he was going to take care of me. I had assumed it was junk. A low balance warning on my checking, maybe. I had not looked. I looked now. It was not my checking account. It was the retirement account. The one I had been building line by line in that notebook since I was 23. And there in plain gray text was a single line I had never authorized and never expected to see in my life. Pending transfer, initiated. I said her name, Danielle. But the line had already gone quiet. She had hung up the way you hang up when you are afraid someone in the next room is about to ask who you are talking to. I set the phone down beside the notebook, the two of them side by side on my kitchen table. One held everything I had built. The other held the first sign that someone had already started taking it apart. I did not sleep that night. I sat with the notebook and the phone until the fog outside turned from gray to the pale, nothing color. It goes just before dawn, and I made myself a promise that I was not going to call anyone in a panic. My grandfather had a rule about that too. Never let a man see you scared until you have counted what he took. So in the morning, I called my retirement plan's service line, sat on hold for the length of an entire pot of coffee, and confirmed what the banner had told me. A transfer had been started on my account. Not finished. Started. Held up, the woman on the line said, because it required a signature the system had flagged as a mismatch. A mismatch. I held on to that word like a railing on a steep stairway. Whatever they had tried to sign, they had not signed it as me well enough. 2 days later, a calendar invitation arrived in my email. Not a text, not a phone call. A formal calendar invitation, the kind I send out at work when I am scheduling a benefits enrollment meeting. The subject line read, Family Sync Brooks Financial Future. Sunday, 4 o'clock. Location, my parents' house. My brother had CC'd my mother and my father like they were stakeholders on a project. I went. Of course I went, because by then I needed to see exactly how far they were willing to take this in front of my face. The dining room had been turned into a conference room. The table where we ate every holiday I have ever had, where my grandmother's turkey used to sit on a platter with the little paper frills on the drumsticks, was cleared down to the bare wood and laid out with paper. Stacks of it. A printed packet at each seat with a cover sheet that read, in a bold font, my brother had clearly chosen himself Brooks' financial future. And at my place across the top of the packet, somebody had laid a pen, just a pen, set down crosswise like the third fork at a fancy dinner, in a spot where a person is meant to know what is expected of them without being told. My mother had set out coffee in the good cups. My father sat at the foot of the table with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead where they live when he wants to look like he is participating without actually reading anything. Tyler stood at the head by the laptop, the screen mirrored to the old television in the corner that my parents only ever use for the news. I made slides, Tyler said, and there was real pride in it. You made slides, I said, about my retirement. It is a family asset, Brooke. It is my asset. My father cleared his throat the way he does before he repeats something my mother told him to say. Your brother understands these things, he said. So do I, Dad. It is literally my job. I spend 40 hours a week explaining exactly these things to county employees who are smarter than this whole room gives me credit for. Tyler clicked to the next slide like I had not spoken. It is different when it is your own money, he said. You get emotional. I stay strategic. That is the whole reason this works better with me at the wheel. And I want to stop here for a second and tell you who my brother actually is, because the slides and the rolled sleeves were doing a lot of work to hide it. Tyler is 3 years younger than me, and he has been the one with the future since the day he was born. He was the boy. He was the one with the hockey scholarship that did not pan out, and the business degree my parents paid for in full, and the 2 companies that both folded inside of 4 years each time, with a story about partners who let him down, and timing that was against him, and money that ran out through no fault of his own. He has never once in his life been the careful one. He has been the one with vision, which is the word my family uses for a man who spends other people's money and calls the failure bad luck. He drives a leased SUV he cannot afford, and he talks like a man on a stage, and somewhere in the last few years he had clearly decided that the difference between him and success was not judgment. It was capital. And his sister, the boring one with the paid-off house and the spiral notebook, was sitting on capital. He clicked forward again. And there on the screen, in a clean corporate logo I had never seen in my life, were 2 words: Meridian Holdings. I read it twice. The whole pitch had been about consolidating my scattered accounts into one simple place, getting everything tidy, reducing my stress. But you do not consolidate retirement savings into a thing called holdings. Holdings is where money goes to be used. Holdings is a destination, not a folder. What is Meridian Holdings? I asked. I asked it quietly, calm as water. The way you ask a question when you already feel the floor tilting and you do not want anyone to see you reach for the wall. The room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. I counted them the way I count everything. 1, 2. My father did not look up. Tyler's jaw did something small. And my mother, sitting there in her cardigan with the good coffee cup in her hand, smiled at me the way she has smiled my whole life right before she closes a door. "Details, sweetheart," she said. And in that one word, details, I understood the entire thing. Because that is the word my brother had used at the first dinner the night with the folder. You do not need to worry about the details. And now my mother was using it in the same soft tone to wave away the one question that actually mattered. They had rehearsed this. The 2 of them, maybe all 3, had sat in this very room and decided in advance that any time I got close to the real answer, somebody would smile and say details, and we would move along. Meridian Holdings was not a detail. Meridian Holdings was where my future was supposed to disappear to, and the entire production with the slides and the printed packets and the pen laid across my place setting was theater built around that one quiet line designed to get my signature on a form before I ever thought to read the destination. I closed the packet in front of me. I did not pick up the pen. "You have all already decided this," I said. It was not a question. My mother set her cup down. And she did something then that I think she believed was kindness. She reached across the bare wood and put her hand over mine the way she did at the first dinner, and she looked at me with the patient face she uses on people who are about to be difficult in public. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be, Brooke," she said. "We already chose. We just didn't say it out loud. I have replayed that sentence more times than I can count. We already chose. We just did not say it out loud. There was no apology in it. No second of doubt." She was not confused about whose money it was. She was not misled by Tyler about what Meridian Holdings meant. She knew my father knew all of them knew, and the only thing they had been waiting on was the right Sunday to tell me the decision had already been made. The meeting was not a discussion, it was a sentencing, and they had been gracious enough to let me sit at the table while they read it. I stood up. I left the packet, I left the pen, and I left the good coffee going cold in the good cup. And on the long drive back up into the fog, one word rode in the passenger seat the whole way home: Meridian. I was going to find out what that word meant if it took me the rest of my life. What I did not know yet, what I would not learn until I found a piece of paper with my own name forged across the bottom of it, was that the word Meridian was the smallest part of what my family had already done. I went back to my parents' house 3 days later on a Wednesday in the middle of the afternoon, when I knew my father would be at his volunteer shift down at the senior center, and my brother would be wherever my brother goes during the day to feel important. I told myself I was going to talk to my mother alone, calmly, woman to woman, and ask her to call the whole thing off before it went any further. That was the story I drove over with. Looking back, I think part of me already knew I was not going for a conversation. I was going to look for the rest of it. My mother let me in and put the kettle on, pleased, I think, because she read my visit as a sign that I was coming around. We sat at the kitchen counter and she talked about the church rummage sale and a neighbor's surgery and the price of beef, and the whole time my eyes were moving around that kitchen, the way they move around a benefits file when something in the numbers does not sit right. There was a stack of mail and paper on the end of the counter, the way there always is in that house bills and church bulletins and coupon flyers all shuffled together. And while my mother got up to find the good mugs, my hand drifted to it. I do not have a noble explanation for that. I just reached over and turned the top few pages the way you do, and underneath a grocery circular, I found a form. It was a beneficiary change form. I knew it on sight because I processed them at work. And it was for my retirement account. My account number was printed across the top, the same number written in my own hand on 100 lines of that spiral notebook. And down at the bottom on the line that says, "Signature of account holder," was my name. Brooke Ellison, in ink. A signature I had never made in my life. I felt the room go very quiet, even though my mother was still talking somewhere behind me about whether the blue mugs or the white mugs. I picked the form up, I held it under the window light, and I looked at the one thing in this whole mess that no story about details or family assets could ever explain away. The capital B was wrong. I have signed my name probably 100,000 times. My B loops to the left at the top always has the way the nun who taught me cursive in 3rd grade insisted on. The B on that form looped to the right. It was confident, it was practiced. Somebody had clearly traced my signature off a real one and worked at it, but the hand that made it did not know my hand. And there is exactly one person in this world who would have a sample of my signature lying around and the nerve to copy it. My brother signs his own name with that same backward loop. I have watched him do it on Christmas cards my whole life. This was not a stranger. This was Tyler sitting at a kitchen table somewhere practicing being me. I turned around with the form in my hand. My mother had 2 mugs out, one blue and one white, and she was looking at them like the decision mattered. "Whose handwriting is this, Mom?" I said. She barely glanced at it. "It is yours," she said. "I never signed this." "Well," she set the mugs down. "You would have." "That is not," I said, and I had to stop and steady the next word before it came out too loud. "That is forgery. Do you understand that word? And here is the part I want you to sit with, because this is the part that actually broke something in me, and it was not the signature." My mother did not flinch. She did not gasp. She did not deny it. She did not even pretend to be surprised that I had found it. She reached for a dish towel that did not need folding, and she folded it anyway, slow and careful, smoothing the creases like she had all the time in the world. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "It's less complicated this way, Brooke. You'd have agreed eventually. We just saved everyone the argument. As if my signature were a formality, a step in a process they had decided to skip on my behalf the way you sign for a package when the neighbor is not home. As if the only thing standing between them and my entire future was a tedious conversation that I, being emotional, would have dragged out, and Tyler, being strategic, had simply handled. The forgery was not the wound. I have worked in this field long enough to know that paper can be challenged and signatures can be questioned. The wound was the flatness in her voice. The wound was that my own mother had looked at a felony committed against her daughter and filed it under tidy. I stood there holding the proof of it, and my eyes drifted past her the way your eyes do when they are looking for somewhere safe to land, and they landed on the refrigerator. There is a photograph on that refrigerator that has been there as long as I can remember. It is the cabin on the Mackenzie, my grandfather's place, a little brown cabin set back from the water with a porch he built himself. White pines so tall behind it they cut off the afternoon sun. In the picture, I am maybe 15, up on the roof, with a hammer patching shingles next to Walt, both of us squinting into the light, and he has his arm half raised like he is about to tell me to mind the edge. I had walked past that photo 1,000 times in my life, but I had never once let myself look at the bottom corner of it. Because in the bottom corner on the white border of the print, there was a small sticker, faded now, peach-colored, the kind a realty office slaps on things, and it said one word, sold. "When did you sell Grandpa's cabin?" I asked. I heard a sound behind me in the doorway. My father. He had come home early after all, and he was standing half in the kitchen and half out of it, his jacket still on his hand on the doorframe. And at the word cabin, he went still in a way I had never seen him go still. Not surprised. Caught. My mother turned back to the mugs. "That was years ago," she said. "That's old news. It was mine," I said. "Grandpa told me it was mine. He told me a dozen times every summer, standing on that porch. He said the cabin goes to the one who fixes the roof. It was the family's, my mother said. And that was the moment the floor I had been standing on my whole life finally gave way, because I understood all at once that this was not the first time my family had reached into my future and helped themselves. The retirement account was not the beginning. It was the second helping. Somewhere years ago, in a season when I was too young and too trusting to ask the right questions, the cabin my grandfather built with his own hands and promised to me on his own porch had been sold, and the money from it had gone somewhere, and no one had ever felt the need to say a single word to me about it. The same hand that forged my name on that form had probably been involved in that too. The pattern was not new. The only thing that was new was that this time I had caught it, while there was still something left to save. I set the forged form down on the counter between the blue mug and the white one. I did not raise my voice. I have learned that the quiet response frightens my family far more than a loud one, because they know how to win an argument with a person who is yelling. "I am taking this with me," I said, and I picked the form back up and folded it into my bag, next to where I keep the notebook. My father said my name once from the doorway. Brooke. Just that. Like the beginning of a sentence he did not have the courage to finish. I drove home through the fog with my own forged signature in my bag and my grandfather's face on that roof burning behind my eyes. And that evening, just after dark, as I sat at my kitchen table trying to decide whether to call a lawyer or my own mother first, my phone rang. The number on the screen was one I had not seen in a long time. My grandmother, Walt's widow. Lorna, 84 years old, living out near Eugene in the same little town she has been in for half a century. I answered, and before I could even say hello, her voice came through clear and certain the way it always was. "It's time you came and got what Walt left you, honey," she said. "I should have given it to you years ago. I did not drive out to my grandmother's that night. It was dark, the fog was thick, and whatever Walt had left me had already waited years. One more day would not change it. But I lay awake again the second sleepless night that week, and I felt something shifting in me that I had not felt before. The fear was still there. The hurt was still there. But underneath them, like bedrock under soft ground, something steadier was settling into place. I had stopped asking whether my family was really doing this to me. That question was answered. The only question left was what I was going to do about it. The next morning, my phone lit up with a text from my mother, and it was so cheerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. It was a birthday invitation. Mine. My 33rd birthday was that coming Sunday, and I had honestly half forgotten it in everything else, but my family had not. The text was a parade. Little cake icons, a balloon, a string of exclamation points. Small family thing my mother wrote just us to celebrate our girl. Thursday evening, 6 o'clock. "We have a surprise for you, sweetheart." I read it twice. "We have a surprise for you." And the word small. Small family thing, just us. A week earlier, I would have read that text and felt the same warm tug I always feel when my family pretends for a moment to be the family I wanted. I would have shown up with my guard down and a smile on my face, ready to be loved for one evening. That is the thing about people like me, the careful ones, the ones who keep notebooks and pay off houses early. We are not actually hard people. We are soft people who learn to build walls because the soft kept getting taken. And a birthday text full of cake emojis from your own mother is designed to find the exact seam in that wall where the soft still leaks through. But I had a forged form in my bag now, and a fridge photo with a sold sticker, and a destination called Meridian Holdings that no one would name out loud. So I did not feel warm. I felt the back of my neck go cold. I called Danielle. She did not pick up the first time. I waited 10 minutes and tried again, and that time she answered on the first ring, and her voice was already low, already cupped the way it had been the first night. "Brooke," she said. "I can't talk long. I got a birthday invitation," I said. "Thursday. Small family thing." "What is it, actually?" There was a pause that told me everything before she said a word. "He's bringing Doug," she whispered. "To my birthday," I said. "Doug is the advisor, the wealth guy. He works with Tyler. There's a power of attorney Brooke. A rollover authorization, too. Tyler wants you to sign it all Thursday. He keeps saying once it's done, you can finally relax and stop fighting everybody. They're going to put it in front of you between the cake and the candles where you can't make a scene with everybody watching, and they think you'll just sign it because that's what you do. You keep the peace." I looked down at my kitchen table. I had a sticky notepad there, the same pad I use for grocery lists, and a pen, and while she talked, I had already, without quite deciding, written 3 lines on the top sheet. I read them back to myself while Danielle breathed on the other end of the line. "Let them finish. Don't sign. Don't shout." I want to tell you about Danielle for a second because she matters, and because by the end of this story, she is one of the only people in it who comes out clean. Danielle married my brother 6 years ago. She is quiet, the kind of woman who learned early that the safest place in a loud family is the edge of the room. For years I had her wrong. I thought she was just Tyler's wife, an extension of him, another voice that would always land on his side of the table. But people surprise you. Sometimes the person standing closest to the fire is the first one to smell the smoke. Danielle had been watching my brother and my parents far longer and far closer than I had, and somewhere in the last few weeks watching them turn the machinery on me, she had decided she did not want to be part of it anymore. She had a child to think about. She had a conscience she was tired of folding up small, and she had picked up the phone. "Does Tyler know you're telling me this?" I asked. The silence on her end stretched long enough that I heard the television cut off in the background, like she had walked into another room and shut a door. "If he finds out," she said finally, "I don't know what happens to me." And I believed her. I knew exactly what kind of man would forge his sister's signature without losing a wink of sleep, and I knew that a man like that does not take kindly to a wife who warns the mark. "Then don't tell anyone what I'm about to do," I said. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked at the sticky note. I looked at the cake emojis still glowing on my phone. And I thought about the dinner with the folder, and the meeting with the slides, and the word details smiled out at me twice by 2 different mouths. They had built every confrontation so far on the same foundation. They controlled the room. They picked the table, the timing, the audience, the script. And every time they had been careful to make sure the only witnesses present were people who had already chosen Tyler. The whole con depended on me being alone with people who would back the lie. So I was not going to be alone. "I'm going to bring a guest," I said. I hung up with Danielle and I sat there a while longer, and then I made one more call, to Priya. The woman from the first dinner who had set down her water glass and asked the one question nobody else in that room had the nerve to ask. I barely knew her. She had been my aunt's friend more than mine, an old presence at funerals and holidays, somebody I had not spoken to in years. But she had seen it too. In that single sentence at the table, "Why does he keep speaking for her?" She had seen the whole shape of it from across a plate of food, and that told me she was exactly the kind of witness I needed. Someone with no stake, someone whose word would carry, someone my family could not dismiss as emotional. She answered like she had been half expecting me, and when I explained carefully that there was a birthday dinner Thursday and that I would be grateful if she would come as my guest, she was quiet for a moment. "That dinner the other night," she said. "The folder. The slides came after, I assume." "They did," I said. and a form with my signature on it that I never signed, and an account I have never heard of where the money is supposed to go. Priya let out a slow breath. Your aunt used to say your mother could sell a drowning man a glass of water, she said. I'll come. What time? 6, I said. But Priya, I need you to do exactly one thing. Nothing more. What's that? Just be in the room. Be there, be calm. And when the moment comes, ask the question you already know how to ask. Let them say the quiet part out loud in front of someone who isn't one of them. She agreed. And before I let her go, I told her one more thing because by then I had made the rest of my decision too. I was going to drive out to Lorna's first that Thursday afternoon before the dinner and find out what my grandfather had left me. Whatever it was, Lorna had been holding it for years, waiting for the day I would need it. I had a feeling that day was about to arrive. The last text came that evening from Tyler. No cake emojis on his. My brother does not waste warmth on people he thinks he has already beaten. Just show up Thursday and smile at Red. We're trying to hand you a future here. Don't make it weird. I looked at the words for a long time. Don't make it weird. As if asking to keep my own retirement was the strange behavior, as if the natural state of things was a sister who signed where she was told and thanked her brother for the privilege. I peeled the sticky note off the pad, the one with my 3 lines on it, and the next morning I pressed it to my dashboard right above the wheel where I would see it the whole drive over. Let them finish. Don't sign. Don't shout. They thought Thursday was the day I would hand over my future. They had the cake planned, the advisor booked the papers, tabbed, the audience selected. They had thought of everything except one thing. I had decided Thursday was the day they would finally say the quiet part out loud with the right person in the room to hear it. I will get to the cabin and to what Lorna pressed into my hands that Thursday afternoon, because it is the thing that turns this whole story. But I am going to take you to the dinner first, the way it happened, because the dinner is where my family looked me in the eye and showed me exactly who they were in front of a witness on my own birthday. I drove over with Priya following in her own car. We had agreed to arrive a few minutes apart, so it would not look planned. The sticky note was still on my dashboard. Let them finish. Don't sign. Don't shout. I read it at the last stop sign before my parents' street, and I left it there. The house looked like a celebration from the outside. There were lights on in every window, and a balloon tied to the porch rail bobbing in the evening damp, and for one foolish second, the soft part of me leaked through the wall again. But I made myself walk up the crooked step my father has never fixed, and I made myself remember the word details, and the cold came back. Inside the dining room was set for an occasion. White linen on the table where the slides had been 3 days before. The good plates. A bottle of wine already open breathing on the sideboard, the kind of bottle my parents bring out maybe twice a year. And at the head of the table where Tyler always plants himself, now the laptop was open again, and beside it sat a leather folio closed. The way you keep something closed when you want everyone to forget, it is there until the right moment. There was also a man I did not know, mid-50s golf shirt, a soft handshake, a smile that arrived a half second before it meant anything. Doug, my brother, said my financial guy. Doug, this is Brooke, the birthday girl. And Doug said, happy birthday, in the warm professional voice of a man who has said happy birthday to a lot of people right before asking them to sign something. My mother kissed my cheek. My father squeezed my shoulder and would not quite meet my eyes. Danielle was already seated near Tyler, looking at her water glass. And then Priya came up the walk behind me, and I watched the room recalibrate. I brought a friend, I said. You all remember Priya. She was close with Aunt Carol. I ran into her and asked her to celebrate with us. There was the smallest hesitation of flicker that passed between my mother and my brother, quick as a card trick, and then the manners took over because manners always take over in that house. Of course, my mother said the more the merrier, and she found another place setting, and Doug shifted his folio an inch to make room. And just like that, there was a stranger at the table who had not been invited and could not be uninvited without making it strange. We ate, or they ate. I moved food around my plate and watched the clock and waited for the folio to open. The conversation stayed light, my mother steering it like a woman parallel parking a long car, and every so often, someone would float a sentence toward the real subject and then drift back the way you circle a cold pool before you go in. It was Tyler who finally went in. He set down his fork, wiped his mouth, and said in the easy voice of a man hosting a meeting, "Well, since we're all here, and since it's a special night, I figured this would be a good time to just get the paperwork side of things wrapped up, so Brooke doesn't have to think about it anymore." And Doug on cue opened the folio. He took out 2 documents and laid them on the linen, smoothing them flat with the side of his hand, and he turned them so they faced me. He set a pen across the top of them, the same gesture as the slides meeting the pen laid crosswise at my place, the wordless instruction. "All you have to do is sign," Doug said gently. 3 places. They're tabbed and ready. I've put little flags so you don't even have to read the whole thing. I have heard a lot of sentences in my career that should make a person's blood run cold, but a financial man telling you not to bother reading is near the top. Tyler nodded along. "It's a formality, Brooke. We've talked about this." And that was when Priya, who had said almost nothing through the entire meal, set down her glass. The sound it made on the wood was the same small click she had made at the first dinner, and the whole table turned toward it like it was a gavel. "You've talked about this," she said. Everyone looked at her. "I've been sitting here for 40 minutes, Priya went on, and her voice was not loud, and it was not cruel, it was just clear, the way water is clear. And every single time someone at this table asks Brooke a question, your brother answers it for her. So I'd like to ask one directly." She looked at Tyler. "Why do you keep speaking for her?" I watched the smile come off my brother's face. It did not snap off. It slid slow, the way wet paint runs down a wall, and underneath it was something I had not seen on Tyler in a very long time. He was not used to being looked at like that. He was used to a room that had already agreed with him before he walked in. The silence that came down then was the heavy kind, the kind where people reach for their water glasses just to have something to do with their hands. My father reached for his. My mother's hand twitched toward hers and stopped. And into that silence I did the thing I had driven over to do. I took out my phone. I had it ready, the screen already open to the account. I turned it face up, and I laid it in the center of the table on the white linen right between the 2 documents Doug had smoothed so carefully, and I pushed it forward until everyone could see. "While we're asking honest questions, I said, can someone explain why my retirement account already shows a transfer out of it, one I never signed for?" Nobody moved. The screen sat there glowing, that single gray line pending transfer, the date the amount my whole future caught in the act of leaving. Doug looked at it and looked at Tyler, and the warm professional fell off his face faster than my brother's smile had. My father stared at the tablecloth. And my mother kept smiling. Her mouth did not move at all, but her eyes did. Her eyes went from the phone to Tyler, to Priya, to me, fast, calculating like a woman watching the exits in a building that has just caught fire. Tyler recovered first because Tyler always recovers first. He pushed his chair back half an inch and spread his hands and put on the wounded patient face he uses when he wants the room to feel sorry for him. "Okay," he said. "Okay. You're being dramatic, Brooke. Everyone in this room is trying to help you, and you're making a scene at your own birthday, in front of a guest." He gestured at Priya like she was something I had dragged in on my shoe. "Do you see what I deal with?" he said to the table. "Do you see why somebody has to handle this for her?" And that was when I saw the smallest, truest thing of the whole night. Danielle moved her chair. It was a few inches, no more than that. She had been sitting close to Tyler the way she always sat on his side in his orbit. And as he spread his hands and called me dramatic and asked the room to pity him, his wife slid her chair back from his side of the table. Just enough that there was a gap of empty linen between them that had not been there a minute before. She did not say a word. She did not look at me. But she moved, and in a family like mine, where everyone has spent their whole life choosing sides without admitting it, moving your chair is louder than any speech. I did not pick up the pen. I want to be very clear about that, because everything that came after hangs on it. They had built the entire evening so that the easiest thing in the world would be for me to sign. Cake on the way, candles waiting, a stranger reassuring me I did not even have to read it, my brother performing his patience, my mother's smile holding like a dam. The whole machine was designed to make the signature feel like the path of least pain. and I just sat there with my hands in my lap and let the pen lie where it was. "I'm not signing anything tonight," I said, "or any night, and I think Doug should take his papers and go home." Doug took his papers and went home. He did it quickly, mumbling something about giving the family some space, gathering the documents and the folio, and his soft handshake, and letting himself out into the dark before my mother could even offer him cake to go. A financial man knows the smell of a deal that has died on the table. There was no scene after that. That is the part people expect, and it did not happen. No one yelled. My mother got up and busied herself with the cake nobody wanted, and my father studied his plate, and Tyler sat there with his ruined smile, and Priya quietly finished her water and said she should be getting home, and thanked my mother for a lovely evening with a straight face that I will treasure for the rest of my life. I left soon after. I did not get my candles. I did not make a wish. I drove home with the sticky note still on my dashboard, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to steady because I had done it. I had sat at their table on their terms, and I had not signed, and I had made them say enough of the quiet part out loud that a witness with no stake had heard it. I thought foolishly that the worst was behind me. It was not, because a family like mine does not lose a fight at the dinner table and simply accept it. They regroup. And by the next morning, before I had even finished my coffee, my phone started lighting up with messages from relatives I had not spoken to in months, all of them gently, lovingly asking the same thing. They wanted to know if I was okay. They had heard, they said, that I was having some kind of breakdown. The first message came from my cousin Marie a little after 8 that morning. "Hey, it said just checking in. You doing okay? Heard things got rough at your birthday." Then a second one from an aunt I see maybe twice a year, almost word for word, the same thinking of you here if you need to talk. By 9 there was a third from a cousin's wife I have spoken to exactly 4 times in my life, telling me she had been praying for me and that I should not be too proud to accept help when family offers it. I stood in my kitchen with my coffee going cold, and I read them in a row, and the cold came up the back of my neck again because I have processed enough cases at work to know what coordinated language sounds like. When 3 different people who do not talk to each other all use the same phrases inside of 12 hours, they did not arrive at those phrases on their own. Somebody handed them out, "Heard things got rough, here if you need to talk." Don't be too proud to accept help. It was the same campaign copied and pasted into 3 mouths. And I understood then what had happened overnight while I was driving home, thinking the worst was behind me. My family had lost at the dinner table in front of a witness, and they had done the thing they have always done when a direct approach fails. They changed the story. They could not get my signature, so they were going to get my reputation instead. If they could make everyone believe I was the unstable one, the paranoid one, the daughter who came apart at her own birthday, then everything I had said about the transfer and the forged form would land as the ranting of a woman who was not well. You do not have to win an argument if you can convince the room that the other person is sick. By that afternoon, I had proof of the machine itself. It came in the form of a casserole. My Aunt Pam, my father's sister, drove all the way out to my bungalow that afternoon while I was at work and left a covered dish on my porch with a note taped to the foil. "Thinking of you in this hard time," the note said. "We are all here for you. Eat something, honey. You need your strength." I came home to find it sitting on my porch step in the fog going cold, a tinfoil monument to a story I had no part in writing. I have never in my life been so insulted by a tray of food. Because that casserole was not concern. It was a flag planted in my own yard. It said, "The family has decided you are the one who is suffering, and we will be generous about it. And your suffering is the proof of your weakness. And isn't it sad, and have you heard?" The cruelty of it, and I want you to really sit with this, was the inversion. I was the one whose name had been forged. I was the one whose savings had been pulled out from under her. I was the victim of an actual crime committed by people who shared my blood. And inside of 48 hours, they had turned me into the aggressor. I had embarrassed the family in front of a guest. I was paranoid about money. I needed help. The thief had become the patient, and the person robbed had become the problem. That is a particular kind of genius my mother has always had, and I had spent 32 years on the receiving end of it without ever once seeing the whole shape of it as clearly as I saw it that week. My father called that evening. I almost did not answer. But he is my father, and there is a part of me that will probably always pick up when he calls, no matter what he has done or failed to do, and so I did. "Honey," he said, and his voice was tired, the voice of a man who had been sent to do a job he did not want to do. "I'm not taking sides here." "You're at her house, Dad," I said. I could hear it. The particular acoustics of my parents' kitchen, the clock that ticks too loud, my mother's footsteps somewhere behind him. "You're literally at Mom's house calling me, taking a side right now. She cried for an hour after your birthday," he said. "An hour, Brooke." "After she tried to take my retirement," I said. "After I found my own name forged on a form. You want to talk about who cried?" There was a pause, and then he said the thing that told me my mother was within earshot, maybe within reach. "See," he said, "this is what worries everybody. The way you frame things. The way I frame things." I stopped. I closed my eyes, and I counted 1, 2, 3, the way I do, and when I opened them I asked him the question I already knew the answer to. "Dad," I said, "did Mom write you a script?" He did not answer. He did not say, "No, do not be ridiculous, of course not." He did not laugh it off. There was just silence on the line, the loud clock and my mother's footsteps, and the sound of a man who had been caught reading from a page somebody else had typed. That silence was the answer. My father, who taught me to ride a bike on that crooked sidewalk, who used to call me his sharp one when I was small and brought home report cards. My father had been handed a set of talking points by his wife and sent to deliver them to his daughter, and when I caught him at it, the most he could do was go quiet. He recovered after a moment the way they all recover. "She's sensitive, you know that," he said. "She takes things personally. We're all just worried about you." That was the kindest thing he said in the whole call, and it was a lie wrapped around a knife. "We are all just worried about you." Worried. As if my fear for my own future were a symptom. As if catching a thief were a sign of illness. I told him I loved him, because I did even then, and I told him I was not having a breakdown, and I hung up before either of us could say anything we could not take back. Then I called Danielle because I needed to know how deep it went, and Danielle, bless her, was already shaking when she answered. "There's a group chat," she said. "The family one. You're not in it. They added everybody but you. Diane's been posting in it for 2 days. Long messages, Brooke, about how you've been under a lot of stress, how you've never been good with the family, how everyone needs to be gentle with you and not engage if you start talking about money because it just makes you spiral. She's framing the whole thing. She's making you the patient. I asked her to send me something, anything, a piece of proof I could hold, and she hesitated because sending it meant betraying Tyler in a way she could not take back, and we both knew what my brother does to people who cross him. But she did it. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a screenshot. A long thread of green and gray bubbles my mother's name at the top of most of them, that same loving, worried poison tone in every line. "We just want what's best for Brooke. She's always struggled to feel included. Please don't bring up the money, it only upsets her." And then near the bottom, a single line from my mother that stopped me cold. I read it once, and then I had to put the phone face down on the table and walk away from it and come back because the breath had gone out of me. "Once the account moves, she'll calm down," my mother had written. "She always does. She always does." There it was. Not worry, not love, not a single shred of the concern they had been spooning out to the whole extended family. Once the money was gone, once it had moved to Meridian Holdings, and there was nothing left to fight over, I would calm down. Because that was the pattern. That was what they were counting on. They had emptied my coffee can when I was 12, and I had calmed down. They had sold my grandfather's cabin, and I had never even known to be angry. Every time in my whole life they had taken something from me, I had grieved quietly and gone back to being the careful, agreeable daughter who kept the peace. And my mother had typed those 4 words into a phone with complete confidence, because in 32 years I had never once given her a reason to doubt them. She always does. I picked the phone back up, and I looked at that line for a long time, And somewhere in me, very quietly, a door I had kept shut my whole life swung open and stayed open. Because she was wrong. Not about the past. About the past, she was exactly right, and that was the terrible part. But she was wrong about this time, and she did not know it yet, and the only person on earth who fully understood how wrong she was me. I did not know yet how I was going to make her see it. But I knew where I was going first. I had a drive to take out west toward Eugene, to a small house in the river fog, where my grandmother had been holding something for years, waiting for the day I would finally need it. And after the morning I had just had, I needed it now. I did not make it out to Lorna's that day. Work does not pause for a family coming apart, and I had a full caseload, a stack of enrollment files and 2 retirements to process for people who had earned their piece and deserved to have someone get the numbers right. So I told myself I would drive out the next afternoon. I put in my day at the county office. I helped a 64-year-old groundskeeper named Earl understand his pension options without once letting my own hands shake on the keyboard, and I drove home through the dusk with the radio on low and the fog already gathering in the low places along the road. I knew something was wrong before I reached my own porch. There were 2 cars in front of my house. My father's old sedan and my brother's leased SUV parked at the curb like they belonged there, and a light on in my kitchen that I had not left on. For 1 second I sat in my truck in my own driveway and felt like a stranger arriving at someone else's home. Then the anger came low and steady, and I got out and went up my crooked porch step and opened my own front door to find my family sitting in my living room. My mother was on my couch, my father was in the armchair by the wood stove, and my brother was not even in the room, he was in my kitchen, and through the doorway I could see him standing at my counter with a fork in his hand, eating leftovers out of a container he had taken from my refrigerator. The first thing I did was look at the little dish by my front door where I keep my keys. And then I saw it. On the kitchen counter, set down like it was nothing a spare key. The brass one. The one I had given my mother 4 years ago when I first moved in case of a burst pipe or a fire while I was traveling the way you do, the way you trust your own mother. "How did you get in?" I said, though I already knew. My mother held up her hand, and there was a second key in it, identical to the one on the counter, and she looked at me as if it explained everything. "I've always had a key," she said. "That was for emergencies," I said. "This is an emergency," my mother said, in the same gentle, terrible voice from the group chat. "You're not yourself." In my own kitchen, my brother opened my refrigerator again, looked in, and said with real disappointment, "You're out of the good coffee." "Get out of my kitchen," I said. He did not move. He leaned against my counter in my house, eating my food, and he gestured with the fork at the kitchen table, and I followed the gesture, and that was when the floor went out from under me a second time that month. My notebook was on the table, my spiral notebook, the 99-cent one with my whole life logged in it line by line, the one I keep in the second drawer down under the dish towels where no one but me has any business reaching. It was out of the drawer. It was lying open on my kitchen table, open to a page, and even from the doorway I could see which page. It was the page I had written after the day at my mother's kitchen, the day I saw the sold sticker on the cabin photo. It was the page where I had written in my own hand "Cabin sold Mackenzie when," and a row of question marks and the word Walt underlined twice. They had gone through my things. They had opened my drawer and found my private record and read it, and they had left it open on the table to the cabin page on purpose so I would know they had seen it. They were not hiding it. They were showing it to me. "What is this anyway?" Tyler said, nodding at the notebook with his fork. "You write down everything, every dollar." "That's not normal, Brooke. People who are doing fine don't keep a ledger of their whole life like a hoarder." He said it to the room to my parents building the case in real time, the same case from the group chat. "See? She's obsessive about money. She's not well." "You went through my things," I said. "You came into my house and you went through my private things." "It was just sitting there," Tyler said. And there it was again. Those 3 words. It was just sitting there. My coffee can at 12. My retirement at 32. My grandfather's cabin somewhere in between. And now my own private notebook, the place where I kept the proof that I had built a life worth protecting, reduced to the same 4 words my family used for anything of mine they decided they had a right to. It was just sitting there, so they helped themselves. That phrase is the whole story of my life in my mother's house, and I had finally heard it enough times to understand that it was never about whatever was sitting there. It was about who gets to decide that a thing is unattended. In my family, anything I owned was by definition just sitting there because I did not count as a real owner of anything. I never had. On the table next to the open notebook, there was a fresh document, a printed power of attorney, the same one Doug had tried to slide across the linen at the birthday, laid out flat on my own kitchen table like a bill that had come due. They had not come to talk. They had come to put the paper in my house, in my space, where they could lean on me with no witness, no Priya, no waiter or stranger to ask why anyone was speaking for me. They had learned the lesson of the dinner. The dinner failed because there was a witness. So they came to the one place on earth where there would not be one, my home. My mother started in, then soft and reasonable, and my father chimed in from the armchair with his scripted lines about being worried, and Tyler set down his fork and walked into my living room and stood over me, and the 3 of them began in my own house to explain to me how reasonable they were being. And then Tyler said the thing I will hear for the rest of my life. He looked around my living room at the wood stove and the bookshelves and the quiet little home I had built with my own 2 hands and paid off 2 years early, and he gestured at all of it with one open palm and he said, "You've got this whole house, Brooke, and nobody to share it with. What do you even need all that money for? What do you even need it for? I have a brother who failed at 2 businesses on other people's money, who leases a car he cannot afford, who forged his sister's name without losing a night of sleep." And he stood in the living room of a house I own, free and clear, and asked me what I needed my own money for, as if the fact that I had built something alone made it less mine, as if a woman without a husband and a house full of kids was simply a holding account waiting for a man with vision to come along and put the capital to better use. I did not shout. I want you to know that. I thought about the sticky note on my dashboard. Let them finish. Don't sign. Don't shout. And I held on to it. I want all of you out of my house, I said. Now. And you can leave that key on the counter. It took a while. There was protest there, was my mother's wounded face, there was my father saying my name in that helpless way. But I held the door open, and I did not move, and I did not raise my voice, and one by one they filed out into the fog, my mother last setting the brass key on the counter, on her way past, with the air of a woman making a great sacrifice. Danielle was the last out the door. She had arrived partway through, hanging back near the entryway the whole time, never quite in the room, never quite gone. And as she passed me on the porch, she slowed, and she put her hand on my arm for just a second, and she said so quietly, I almost lost it under the wind in the pines, "There's something about the cabin money you still don't know. Ask Lorna. Ask her tonight." Then she was gone down my crooked step and into the SUV, and I stood alone in the doorway of my own violated house with the brass key cold on the counter behind me and my grandmother's name ringing in my ears. I did not wait until the next afternoon. I got in my truck that night and I drove west toward Eugene, toward the river fog and a small house, and an old woman who had been waiting years to hand me the truth. I'm going to hold the cabin for one more section because I want to tell it to you whole, the way Lorna told it to me. And there is one more thing my family did first that you need to understand. Because while I was driving west that night with my grandmother's voice in my head, the story my mother had been planting in the family group chat had already grown roots somewhere far more dangerous than my aunts and cousins. It had spread out into the town, and in a place like ours, the town is everything. You have to understand how my part of Oregon works. It is small communities tucked into the valley's old logging towns that turned into bedroom towns, but kept the same 100 families' places, where everybody knows your truck and your church, and the year your roof was last redone, but where nobody asks you a direct question to your face. People here mind their own business, and they prize a person who does the same. A quiet life is a respected life. The steadiness I had built, the paid-off house, the careful job, the way I kept to myself, those were not seen as odd here. They were seen as the marks of a sound person, which is exactly why what my mother did to me cut the way it did. She did not just attack me. She attacked me in the one currency my whole community trades in. She made the steady one look like the cracked one. The first sign came that Saturday at the farmer's market. I go every Saturday I can. It is one of the small good things in my week. The same stalls, the same growers, a woman named Pat who sells the best lavender in the county and always saves me a bundle. And that Saturday, I noticed it before I could name it. A neighbor I have waved to for 4 years, a man named Cole, who lives down the road from me, saw me coming up the row, and instead of the nod he always gives me, he found something fascinating on the far side of the apple display and turned his back. Not rudely, gently. The way you turn from someone you have decided to feel sorry for and do not know what to say to. Then Pat, at the lavender stall, the one who always saves me a bundle, did not have it set aside. She had a smile on, but it was careful, and she asked how I was holding up as if I were carrying something. And when I said I was fine, she looked at me a beat too long, the way you look at someone who's fine you do not believe. I left the market early. The whole place had a film over it, a softness in the way people looked at me that I had never had pointed at me before, and that I recognized because I have aimed it at other people myself in my life. The careful pity you save for someone you have hurt is not doing well. The next morning it followed me into church. I do not go every week, but I go, and there is a coffee hour after in the basement with the big steel urn and the folding tables and the same dozen women who run everything in that congregation and most of the rest of the town besides. The queen of them is Gail. Gail has been a fixture in that basement for 30 years. She knows everyone she means well in the way that the most dangerous people in a small town always mean well, and she had a piece of paper in her hand when she came over to me by the urn. It was the prayer list, the one they print up and hand around so the congregation knows who to lift up in their prayers that week. And Gail patted my wrist and said with the warmth of a woman doing a kindness, "We've got you on the prayer list, dear," for what I said, for healing honey, and for clarity. She said it so sweetly. "Your mother told us how hard things have gotten for you lately. The confusion, the money worries. We're all just praying you find your footing again." I looked down at the sheet in her hand, and there was my name printed among the sick and the grieving and the lost. Brooke Ellison for healing and clarity. I coordinate retirement benefits for a living. "Gail," I said, "I spend every working day managing money for people who trust me to get it right. There is no confusion. There are no money worries. I have a paid-off house and a savings account my brother is trying to steal. And here is the moment I will remember, because it was the first crack of light in a very dark week." Gail's smile flickered. Not because she doubted me, because for the first time she doubted the story. She looked at me, really looked at the steady woman standing in front of her, who did not sound confused at all, who sounded clearer than half the people in that basement, and something in her face wavered between the version she had been told and the version standing in front of her. "Well," she said slowly, folding the list, "that's what your mother said. That's what your mother said." 4 words, but I heard the doubt move into them, and I filed it away, because in a town that runs on what people say, a single woman beginning to wonder whether she had been told the truth is the first stone that starts a wall coming down. I did not know yet how much that wavering moment in Gail would matter, but I noticed it. I always notice. That week the small withdrawals started. There is a dinner club I belong to, 8 women who rotate hosting once a month, and I had been hosting in 2 weeks. A text came gently from the organizer. "We're going to push the rotation," she wrote. "Give you some time to focus on yourself. No pressure to host while things are hard." No one had asked me if things were hard. The town had simply agreed that they were. My invitation had been quietly withdrawn, framed as a mercy, and that is how it works in a place like this. No one slams a door in your face. They just stop opening them kindly one at a time until you find yourself standing alone in a community you thought you belonged to, holding a casserole somebody left to prove how sad your situation had become. But the blow that took the breath out of me did not come from the market or the church or the dinner club. It came at work on Monday morning from my coworker Renata. Renata has the cubicle next to mine. She is blunt, where I am careful, loud where I am quiet, and she is the closest thing I have to a real friend at that office. She leaned over the half wall between our desks first thing Monday, and there was no softness in her face, none of the pity I had been swimming in all weekend. There was alarm. "Brooke," she said low, "your brother called HR." I went still. "He what?" "He called the office. Last week. Asked to speak to someone about you. I only know because Sandra in HR is my cousin, and she thought I should hear it from a friend instead of finding out some other way." Renata's voice dropped further. "He asked," and these are the words she said he used, "he asked whether you were fit to handle sensitive financial information, given some personal difficulties he didn't want to get into. He suggested somebody might want to keep an eye on the accounts you have access to." I sat back in my chair. My ears were ringing. Because do you understand what that is? My job is the one thing in my life that is entirely, undeniably mine. It is not a house my family can claim is too big for me. It is not a savings account they can call a family asset. It is my work, my profession, the thing I am good at, the thing strangers trust me with every single day. And my brother, having failed to get my money and having failed to get my signature, had picked up a phone and called the place where I earn my living and tried to plant the idea that I could not be trusted with money. The exact lie he needed people to believe. He was not just trying to take my retirement anymore. He was trying to take the very career that proved I was the one person in my family who actually knew how to protect it. Renata looked at me, and she said the thing I had not let myself say out loud yet. "He's not just after your money anymore, Brooke. He's coming for your job. He's trying to leave you with nothing." I sat at my desk and I thought about the long drive west I had taken 2 nights before, and the small house in the river fog, and what my grandmother had put into my hands at her kitchen table. And I knew, sitting there with Renata's words landing one after another, that the thing Lorna had given me was about to stop being a memory and start being a weapon. Let me take you back 2 nights to the drive I took after I put my family out of my house, because that is where the ground finally shifted under all of it. I drove west in the dark past Salem and down the valley, the headlights cutting a tunnel through the fog that hangs along the river roads at night. Lorna lives outside Eugene in the same small house she has lived in for 50 years, the house she and Walt moved into when my father was a boy, a low place with a deep porch and a yard that runs down toward a creek. By the time I pulled in, it was nearly 10, and the porch light was on, and I knew she had left it on for me because Lorna leaves a light on for the people she loves the way other people send flowers. She was at the door before I reached the step, 84 years old, in a flannel robe, her hair down her eyes as clear as they have ever been. She did not ask why I had come at night with no warning. She just held the door open and said, "You look like your grandfather did the day he finally figured out what they were doing. Come in. I've got the kettle on." Her kitchen was warm in a way my parents' kitchen has never once been. Not the temperature. The warmth that comes from a person who has spent her whole life giving more than she takes. There was a photo on the wall by the door that stopped me, the same one that is on my parents' refrigerator, me at 15, up on the cabin roof beside Walt, except Lorna's copy had no sticker on it. And there on a hook beside the photo, hanging on a loop of leather, was a brass key gone dark with age. The cabin key. I had not seen it in years. I sat at her table, and she poured the tea, and she looked at me for a long moment, and then she said the thing she had clearly been waiting years to say. "I should have told you about the cabin a long time ago," Lorna said. "I let your father talk me into staying quiet. He said it would only hurt you, and I was old and tired, and I let him. That was the worst thing I ever did, and I've carried it since. Tell me now," I said. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "Your grandfather left that cabin to you," she said. "Not to the family. To you by name. He wrote it down. He told me 100 times. He said Lorna the cabin goes to Brooke because Brooke is the only one of them who ever asked if the roof needed fixing before she asked what the place was worth. The rest of them looked at that cabin and saw money. You looked at it and saw a thing to take care of. He knew the difference. He always knew the difference. She set her cup down. He sold it the spring after your grandfather passed, she said. Your brother, Tyler. He was the one who handled the estate. You remember he volunteered. He was so helpful, and your parents were grieving and glad to have someone take it off their hands. He sold the cabin within months. Said he'd reinvest the money for the family, said it was smarter than letting a building sit there falling apart. Your parents signed off on it, and the money went straight into that first company of his, the one that folded. It was supposed to be yours, Brooke. It was yours. And he turned it into capital for a business that didn't last 2 years, and not one of them ever said a word to you about it. I sat there in my grandmother's warm kitchen, and I felt the second floor go out from under me in a week. Because do you see it now? The retirement account was not the first time. It was not even the second. It was a pattern as old as I was. When I was 12, they took the coffee can for Tyler's skates. When my grandfather died, they took the cabin he left me by name and writing, and they poured it into Tyler's first failure, and they made sure I never knew, because they knew exactly how I would respond. I would grieve quietly and go back to being the careful daughter. And now, with that failure long gone and another one circling the drain, they had come back for the one, well, they had not yet dug into. My future, my account, my notebook. Tyler had spent my inheritance on his first dead company, and now he needed my retirement to save his next one, and the whole production with the slides and the folio and the forged signature was just the latest version of a thing they had been doing to me my entire life. I'm here to take care of it, Lorna said, and she got up slower than she used to, and she went to a drawer in the hutch and took something out and brought it back to the table. It was an envelope, cream-colored soft at the corners from years of handling, sealed with my name written across the front in a hand I knew better than my own. Walt's hand. The same blocky, careful printing he used to write on the lumber he sold, and the lunch sacks he packed and the birthday cards he gave me every year, until the year he could not any more. He left this with me before he passed, Lorna said. Made me promise to give it to you when you needed it, and not a day before. I almost gave it to you at his funeral. I almost gave it to you the day I heard what your brother did with the cabin. But your grandfather said, wait, she'll know the day. And so I waited. She pressed it into my hands. I think today's the day, honey. And right then, with my grandfather's envelope warm in my palms and my throat tight, my phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up. Tyler. I should not have answered. But I did because I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear what a man sounds like when he has taken everything from his sister and still believes he is owed more. Brooke, he said, and there was no apology in his voice, no awareness, nothing. He sounded like a man making a reasonable business call. Look, I'll be straight with you since the soft approach clearly isn't working. That account is the only thing keeping the company alive right now. The next 90 days are make or break. You owe the family this. I owe the family, I said. After everything Mom and Dad did for you, he said. After everything. The least you can do is help your own brother instead of blowing all of this up over your pride. You sold Grandpa's cabin, Tyler, I said. There was a pause on the line, a real one. And then he said, and I want you to hear this, because it tells you everything about who my brother is. That's not the same thing, and you know it. He did not say, I did not. He did not say it never happened. He admitted it in a single breath and then declared it irrelevant in the next, because in Tyler's mind, taking what belonged to me was simply the natural order of things, the way water finds the low ground. Your brother needs a future, Brooke, he said, his voice climbing into the wounded register now. You just wanted comfort, a paid-off house and a quiet life and money sitting there doing nothing. Grandpa would have wanted you to help the family. He'd be ashamed of how you're acting. I did not answer him. I hung up the phone and I set it face down on Lorna's table, and I looked at the envelope in my hands. Open it later, Lorna said softly, when you're alone and steady. But I'll tell you what's in it in case you need to know before then. Your grandfather didn't just leave you a letter, Brooke. He left you the cabin properly in writing the way he meant to, with everything spelled out who it was for and why. The thing your brother sold was never his to sell, and Walt made sure there was paper to prove it. He always did love a clean record, said a man's word was good, but a man's signature was better. She reached across the table and closed my fingers around the envelope, both of her old hands over mine. "Walt left you more than a memory, honey," she said. "He left you the one thing that turns all of this into the truth." I drove home that night with the envelope on the passenger seat where the sticky note's shadow seemed to still be, and I did not open it, not then. I waited until I was alone and steady, just as she said. And when I finally did open it 2 days later, after Renata told me my brother had called my office to come for my job, my hands went still, and I knew exactly what I was holding and exactly what I was going to do with it. Because the thing about my family was that they had spent my whole life telling a story about me and Walt, from years in the grave, had handed me the one document that made the truth impossible to argue with. I just had to decide where to read it out loud. I had Walt's envelope in my bag the day they cornered me at the grocery store. I had taken to carrying it with me unopened still, because I could not stand to leave it at the house with everything else they had already proven they would let themselves into. It rode in the bottom of my bag under my wallet and my keys, the soft cream corner of it pressed against the spiral notebook, the two of them together, the record of where I came from and the record of what I had built. It was a Tuesday after work, and I had stopped at the market on the edge of town for the kind of small, plain groceries a person buys when she lives alone and likes it. A bag of coffee, the good kind this time, to replace what my brother had complained about. Eggs, a single chicken breast, a bundle of Pat's lavender I had finally gone back for. My cart was the cart of a quiet life, and I was pushing it down the frozen aisle reaching for a bag of peas when I heard my mother's voice carry across the store. "There she is." I knew before I turned around that it was a performance because my mother does not say "there she is." My mother says "Brooke" or "sweetheart" or nothing at all. "There she is what you say when you want a room to look." And the room looked. My mother was coming up the aisle toward me with her arms half open and her face arranged into grief, her eyes glistening, and behind her a step back was Tyler in his good jacket, with the steady, sorrowful expression of a man shouldering a heavy family burden. And clustered near the end of the aisle by the freezer doors with their own carts were Gail and two of the church women from the basement coffee hour, the women who run the town's whole web of who is doing well and who is not. I understood it instantly. This was not a chance meeting. My mother had not run out of peas. She had found out my shopping day, the way she has always known everything, and she had brought my brother and an audience of the very women whose opinion travels fastest, and she was about to put on a show. "There she is," my mother said again, dabbing at her eyes with the side of one finger. "Sweetheart, we've been so worried about you. We just don't know what to do anymore." "Mom," I said quietly. "We're at the store. I just want my daughter back." She let her voice catch on the word back. A small theatrical break pitched exactly loud enough to carry to the freezer doors. "We've all been praying. We just want our girl to come back to us." Heads turned by the frozen peas. A man with a toddler in his cart paused and looked. The church women went still and watchful, and I stood there with my plain little cart, my coffee and my eggs and my single chicken breast, and my bundle of lavender surrounded by people who had already spent 2 weeks being told that I was confused, that I had money troubles, that I was coming apart, and now here was the proof served up live in aisle 9. The unstable daughter cornered by her loving, weeping mother and her patient, long-suffering brother. My mother had built this scene the way she built the dinner with the folder and the meeting with the slides. She picked the place, the timing, the audience, and this time the audience was the whole town. Tyler stepped forward and put his hand on my cart. He did it gently, the way you steady something that might tip over. He laid his hand on the handle of my cart next to mine, and he said in a low, calm, carrying voice, "It's okay, Brooke. We're not going to make a thing of it. We just want to take you home and talk." "Take your hand off my cart, Tyler," I said. And my mother turned to Gail, to the church women, to the whole aisle, and she spread her hands as if I had proven her entire case, and she said, See how she gets. You see what we're dealing with. I want to tell you what that moment felt like, because I think some of you have stood in some version of that aisle. It felt like drowning in shallow water. There was no single blow I could point to, nothing loud enough to fight just my own mother's tears and my brother's gentle hand, and a crowd of decent people watching all of it arranged so that anything I did would prove the story. If I raised my voice, see how she gets. If I cried, the poor thing, just like her mother said. If I walked away, well, she always was difficult, wouldn't even let her family help her. The trap was built so that every exit confirmed the lie. That is the genius of it, and that is the cruelty of it, and standing there by the freezer doors, I felt the full weight of what it means to have your own family decide to spend your reputation to get at your savings. I did not break. I want you to know that. My grandfather did not raise a granddaughter who breaks in a grocery store. I kept my hands steady on my cart, and I kept my voice low and even the way I keep it when I am walking a frightened retiree through bad news at work. "I'm fine, Mom," I said to her, but also to the aisle, to the church women, to the man with the toddler. "I am not confused. I am not coming apart. I have a job and a paid-off house and a savings account my brother is trying to move into his failing company. That's the whole story. There is nothing else." And then I saw it. The thing that, looking back, was the first stone in the wall coming down. For half a second, Gail's face changed. She had been watching my mother weep, swept up in it, like everyone else, her own face soft with sympathy. But as my mother turned to her and spread her hands and performed her grief, Gail's eyes did something. They moved off my mother's tears and down to my mother's hands. And my mother's hands were perfectly steady, not a tremble in them, the hands of a woman in complete control, while her face wept and her voice broke. Grief does not have steady hands. Performance does. And Gail, who has sat in that church basement for 30 years and watched real grief and real trouble pass through that town 100 times, saw the seam between the tears and the hands, and for one instant I watched the doubt that had flickered in her over the prayer list bloom into something larger. She did not say anything. She did not take my side, not there, not yet. But her face had changed, and I caught it, and I held on to it, because I always notice, and I knew I had just gained the one thing I needed more than any document, a witness who had started to see. I did not stay to find out what anyone said next. I left my cart right there in the frozen aisle, coffee and eggs and lavender and all, and I walked out of that store with my head up and my bag over my shoulder, past the registers, past a clerk who would not meet my eyes out the automatic doors into the gray light of the parking lot. And there, standing between two parked cars in the drizzle, I finally did the thing I had been carrying around for days. I reached into my bag, and I took out Walt's envelope, the cream-colored one, soft at the corners with my name in his blocky hand, and I broke the seal he had pressed down before I was old enough to understand any of this, and I opened it all the way for the first time. I read what my grandfather had left me. I read it standing in a grocery store parking lot in the rain, and my hands, which had stayed so steady through the whole performance inside, went still in a different way. Not steady. Stopped. The way your hands go when you are holding something that changes everything. I am not going to tell you yet exactly what was in that envelope. I am going to make you wait the way I waited, because you need to see where I chose to read it out loud to understand why it landed the way it did. But I will tell you this. Standing in that parking lot with my mother's tears still hanging in the air behind me and the whole town half convinced I was the one who had lost her mind, I read my grandfather's words, and I understood three things at once. I understood what my brother had really done all those years ago in detail in writing. I understood why my family had been so desperate to discredit me before I ever found this. And I understood finally that the truth was never going to come out at their dinner table where they controlled the room. After the freezer case, after watching them spend my good name in front of the whole town, I knew exactly where this was going to end. And it was going to be a room my family did not control, full of people whose opinion my brother could not afford to lose. Now I will tell you what was in the envelope, because by now you have earned it the way I had. Inside was a letter 2 pages in Walt's blocky printing, and folded behind it a single document older, the paper gone soft and yellow at the folds. The document was the cabin. My grandfather had not simply meant to leave it to me. He had written it down properly, signed and witnessed naming the cabin on the Mackenzie and naming me by my full name, Brooke Ellison, as the one it was to pass to. A man who spent 40 years selling lumber on a handshake had learned late that a handshake was not enough for the people in his own family, and he had made a record. Said a man's word was good, but a man's signature was better. He had left me proof in his own hand that the cabin my brother sold within months of the funeral had never been Tyler's to sell, and that everyone who signed off on that sale had given away something that already belonged to someone else. But it was the letter that stopped my hands in that parking lot. He wrote about the roof. He wrote that of all his grandchildren, I was the only one who ever climbed up there with him and asked if the shingles needed work before I ever asked what the place might be worth. He wrote, "You're the only one who ever asked if the roof needed fixing before you asked what the place was worth." And then he wrote the line, "I have read more times than I can count." He wrote, "Your brother is going to spend his whole life managing things that aren't his to manage, and your folks are going to let him because it's easier than saying no. Don't you let them manage you, kiddo. You were built to manage yourself. When the day comes that they try, you take this letter and you stand up in front of people who matter, and you let my words do the talking I won't be there to do, in front of people who matter." He had told me where to do it. From years in the grave, my grandfather had told me the one thing I had not figured out on my own. Not the kitchen, not the dinner table, people who matter. I took 2 days. I went to work. I kept my head down. I let the town keep its version of me for a little longer, and I thought. And then Danielle called. I have to tell you, Danielle had crossed a line by then that she could not uncross. Somewhere between the home invasion and the grocery store, she had stopped being Tyler's wife, who slipped me information and become something else, a person who had decided which side of her own marriage she was going to be able to live with. She called me on a burner habit now, from her car, from the grocery store, from anywhere Tyler was not, and her voice had lost the fear and found something harder underneath it. "He's throwing a party," she said. "He's calling it a relaunch. He's renting the event room at the wine bar downtown, the nice one, and he's inviting everybody, investors, 2 of the men from the old company who he still owes, the pastor, half his old clients, Gail and her circle because they bring the church money. He's going to stand up in front of all of them and talk about lessons learned and family values and how he's built something solid this time that people can trust their money with." "Family values," I said. "Family values," she said. "Brooke, it's all built on the same thing. The whole pitch. He's the trustworthy one, the steady son who manages the family's money. That's the entire image he's selling to that room. A man you can hand your savings to and sleep at night." And there it was, the arena. Because do you see it? Every bad thing my family had done to me had run on one engine, the idea that Tyler was the safe pair of hands and I was the unstable one. The forged form, the slides, the breakdown story, the call to my office, the scene at the freezer case, all of it served one purpose: to make the town believe that money belonged with Tyler and not with me. And now my brother was about to gather the exact people whose trust he needed to survive, the people whose money was the only thing that could keep his sinking company afloat, into one room and stand up in front of them and stake everything on that single image. A man you can trust with money. It was the most fragile thing in the world, that image, and he was about to hold it up in the air in front of everyone who mattered. All it needed was the truth walking in the front door. I called Lorna and put her on speaker, and I told her and Priya and Danielle, all at once, the 4 of us strung together across 3 phones, what I was thinking. There was a silence, and then my grandmother's voice came through the speaker, dry and certain as a dock plank in the sun. "Your grandfather waited his whole life for someone to tell that boy no in front of people who mattered," Lorna said. "He never could do it himself. He was too soft, and your father was too weak, and your mother liked the peace too much. You going to do it or not?" "I'm going to do it," I said. "Then I'm coming," Lorna said. "Don't you dare leave me home for this. You put me in the car, and you take me to that party, and I will say what Walt couldn't." Danielle said she could get me in. She was Tyler's wife. She had the guest list, the room booked under their name, the catering, all of it. No one would stop the host's wife from bringing whoever she liked. Priya said she would come too calm and unconnected the witness with no stake, whose word the room would trust. And Lorna, 84 years old, said she would put on Walt's old wool coat and ride up from Eugene to stand in a wine bar and tell the truth her husband had left her holding for years. I thought about a thing my mother had said to me once long ago in a different fight, the thing she believed gave her family all the power they had ever held over me. No one will believe you over us. That had always been true. There were more of them. They had the church, the family, the practice story. It had been true my whole life. But it had only ever been true in rooms they controlled. I opened my spiral notebook to a clean page, the same notebook they had pulled out of my drawer, and called the sign of an unwell woman, and I uncapped my pen, and I wrote a single line at the top of the blank page. The plan complete in 7 words. Let them finish. Then let the room decide. I capped the pen and closed the notebook and sat there in my quiet house in the fog, and for the first time in weeks, I was not afraid. My brother was going to stand up in a room full of the only people whose opinion he could not survive losing, and he was going to tell them he was a man you could trust with money. And I was going to walk in with my grandmother on my arm and a letter from a dead man in my hand, and I was going to let the room decide which Ellison was telling the truth. The relaunch was in 5 days. The wine bar downtown is the nicest room our town has exposed brick and a long bar and a back event space with soft amber lighting and little high tables where people stand and hold their glasses and decide what they think of each other. By the time we arrived, it was full. Tyler had spared no expense he did not have. There were trays of food going around a banner with a new company logo and 40 or 50 people in their good clothes, the exact people my brother needed. The 2 men from his first company who he still owed money to and was now hoping to charm into a second round. The pastor, 6 of his old clients, Gail and 2 of her circle holding white wine, the church money he was courting. And near the front, my parents, my mother in her good blazer, and my father in a jacket I had not seen in years, standing close to the little raised platform where a microphone waited. I came in through the front door with my grandmother on my arm. Lorna had worn Walt's old wool coat, the gray one, far too big for her now, and she walked slow, but she walked tall, and she would not let me carry the folder she insisted on holding herself. Danielle was at my other side, having let us in past the host's table without a word, and Priya came a step behind, calm and watchful, in a plain dark dress, the witness with no stake. We did not announce ourselves. We did not have to. I felt the room notice us, the way a room notices weather changing. A few heads turned. My mother saw me from the front, and her face did something complicated, the performance grief flickering into alarm and back, and I watched her reach over and touch Tyler's sleeve. But Tyler was already stepping up to the platform. He had a glass in his hand and a slide up on the screen behind him, his new logo, and he tapped the side of his glass with a ring until the room quieted and he began. He was good. I will give my brother that. He has always been good in front of a room, that easy confidence, that warmth he can turn on like a tap. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about hard lessons and humility and starting fresh. And then he came to the heart of it. The line the whole evening was built on the line that was meant to open every checkbook in that room. I built my career on one principle, Tyler said, and he put his hand flat on his chest. You protect family money like it's sacred. That's it. That's the whole thing. The people in this room can trust me with what matters most because I treat every dollar like it belongs to my own family. He paused for the warm murmur he expected, and into that pause, before the murmur could fully form, I said in a voice that was not loud, but that carried the way a clear voice carries through a quiet room, then explained my signature. The room turned. 40 faces, 50, swinging toward the back, toward me, toward the old woman in the gray wool coat on my arm. I walked forward. I did not hurry. I have learned that the slowest person in a room is the one everyone watches. I crossed the floor between the high tables, past the pastor, past Gail, whose eyes were already on me, and I came to the edge of the platform where my brother stood with his glass and his logo glowing behind him, and I did 2 things. I took the pen out of my bag, the pen from the birthday dinner, the one they had laid across the papers for me to sign, the one I had refused to pick up. I had taken it home that night without quite knowing why. And I set it down on the edge of my brother's podium, gently in front of everyone, the unsigned pen, and I let it sit there. Then I took out my phone, the screen already lit to the account, and I set it down beside the pen. "That's my name," I said to the room, not to Tyler, to the room on a form I never signed. "That's a forgery." And that, I nodded at the phone, is my retirement account, the one I built by myself, starting at 23, with a transfer pulled out of it, that I never authorized headed into a company my brother controls. The room was silent now, the heavy kind, the kind where people forget they are holding glasses. "And there's a cabin," I said, "on the Mackenzie River. My grandfather built it with his own hands, and he left it to me by name in writing. And this man sold it the spring after the funeral and poured the money into his first company, the one some of you lost money in, and not one person in my family ever told me it was gone." "Brooke." Tyler's laugh came out thin, a sound I had never heard him make. He looked around the room, trying to gather it back to him, trying to find the easy confidence, and finding it gone. "This is private. This is a family thing. This isn't the place." And that was when Lorna let go of my arm and stepped forward on her own. 84 years old, in her dead husband's coat, she walked to the front of that bright room full of strangers, and she planted herself, and she looked not at Tyler, but at the people he was courting, at the investors and the pastor and the church women, and she spoke in a voice that did not waver, steady as river stone. "My husband, Walt Ellison," she said, "left that cabin to the one grandchild who'd climb up and fix the roof before she ever asked what the place was worth. He wrote it down. He signed it. I've got the paper right here in my hand." She held up the soft, yellow document so the room could see it. "My grandson sold it out from under her and called it managing the family's money." She let that sit. Then she looked straight at the men Tyler owed. "That's not managing," she said. "That's theft. And if he'll do it to his own grandfather's gift to his own sister, ask yourselves what he'll do with yours." You could have heard the ice settle in the glasses. Then Danielle stepped up beside me. My brother's wife, in front of my brother's investors, in front of the pastor, in front of everyone, put herself at my side and said in a clear, tired, finished voice, "It's true. All of it. I watched it happen. I've been watching it happen for years. And I saw my brother lose a room for the first time in his life. I have watched Tyler work rooms since we were children. I have watched him charm teachers and coaches and loan officers and 2 sets of business partners and our own parents over and over his whole life, and I had never once seen him fail at it. But it was failing now in real time in front of me. The faces in that room were closing against him. The 2 men he owed were looking at each other. Gail had set her wine down on a high table and was staring at my mother with an expression I had last seen begin to form at the freezer case, the look of a woman realizing she had been handed a lie and had carried it for someone. The pastor's face had gone grave, and Tyler stood up there with his glowing logo behind him and his unsigned pen in front of him and felt the whole thing slipping, and he reached the way a drowning man reaches for the oldest handhold in our family. He turned away from me. He turned away from the room. He looked toward the front where our parents stood, and his voice cracked all the way open. "Dad," he said. "Dad, say something." It was the lever. It had always been the lever. For 35 years, whenever Tyler was cornered, whenever the truth got too close, he turned to our father, and our father covered for him, smoothed it over. Told everyone Tyler meant well, took the weight off his son and set it down somewhere else, usually on me. "Say something, Dad. Make this stop. Make her stop. Tell them I'm the good one." It was the sentence that had run our family my entire life. And for the first time that I had ever witnessed, my father did not move to save him. I watched my father stand there at the front of that room, with every eye on him, with his son begging and his wife's hand tightening on his arm, and I watched something in his face that I had been waiting 32 years to see. He looked at Tyler. He looked at Lorna, his own mother in his own father's coat, holding up a paper he knew the meaning of better than anyone. He looked at me, and he opened his mouth, and the whole room leaned in to hear what Russ Ellison was finally going to say. What my father said in front of that room was nothing. He stood there with his mouth open and the whole place waiting, and he could not do it. He could not save Tyler, and he could not condemn him, not out loud, not with that many eyes on him, and so he did the thing he has always done when a moment asked more of him than he had. He looked at the floor, and the silence where his answer should have been was its own kind of answer, and the room heard it. Tyler heard it. My brother looked at our father's bowed head and understood that the lever had finally broken in his hand, and he set down his glass on the edge of the platform next to my unsigned pen, and he walked out the side door of that wine bar without another word, past the people he had been courting, past the men he owed into the parking lot and the fog, and he did not come back. The party did not so much end as dissolve. People found their coats. The two men Tyler owed left together, talking low. The pastor stopped beside me on his way out and said only quietly, "I'm glad you came tonight, Brooke." And the way he said it told me he had heard everything and understood it. Gail squeezed my arm at the door, the same arm she had patted over the prayer list, and this time there were tears in her eyes that were not performance. "I'm sorry," she said. "I am so sorry, dear." And she went out into the night. The room emptied until it was just the catering staff stacking glasses and a side room off the main floor where Danielle had steered me and Lorna to sit down because my grandmother had been on her feet too long and her hands had started to tremble for real, the honest tremble of an old woman who had spent everything she had on doing the right thing. And then my father came in. He came alone slowly, the way a man walks into a room he is not sure he is allowed in. Lorna looked at her son for a long moment and then said she needed air, and Danielle helped her up, and the two of them stepped out and left me and my father alone in that little room with the noise of the staff clinking glasses through the wall. There was a photograph framed on the side table in there. Of all things, a generic decorating photo. The wine bar had hung a river and some trees, and my father's eyes kept going to it like it was the cabin, like it was the Mackenzie, like it was the porch where his own father had stood and named the place for me a dozen summers in a row. I still had Walt's letter in my hands. I had not let go of it the whole night. I knew about the cabin, my father said. He was not looking at me. He was looking at that river photo on the wall. I knew when Tyler sold it. I knew the money went into the company. I told myself he had a plan, that he was smarter about these things than the rest of us, that it would all come out fine in the end. It was easier than the alternative, which was what Dad I said. He pressed his thumb and his forefinger against his closed eyes hard, the way you do when you are trying to hold something back or push something down. The alternative was admitting I'd already picked, he said, between my children. That I'd been picking your whole lives every time and calling it keeping the peace. Your grandfather saw it. He told me once, he said, "Russ, you've got 2 kids and you only ever worry about one of them, and it's not the one who needs worrying about." He said you were the only one of us who'd ever really have anything, because you were the only one who took care of things instead of waiting for them to be handed over. He pressed his eyes harder. He was right. I should have said it years ago. I should have said a lot of things years ago. And I want to be honest with you about what that did to me, sitting in that little room, because this is the part of these stories nobody warns you about. It did not feel like winning. There was no rush of triumph, no satisfaction. There was just my father, an old man, now finally saying the true thing 32 years too late, and it landing in the empty space where it could have done some good if he had said it when I was 12 or 20, or any of the 1,000 times in between when one honest sentence from him might have changed everything. Your grandfather was right about you. It was true, and it was too late. And both of those things sat in that room at the same time, and neither one canceled the other out, and that is just how it is, sometimes with the people who were supposed to protect you. I did not get to answer him, because my mother filled the doorway. She had her good blazer on and her purse on her arm, and her face had given up the grief entirely, now dropped it like a coat in a warm room, and what was underneath it was hard and dry and furious. She did not look at me with shame. She looked at me with the flat certainty of a woman who had decided I was the villain of this story and was not going to be argued out of it. "Russ," she said, "come home." My father did not move. "After everything we did for you," my mother said to me, her voice low and even and final. "After everything. You humiliated your own brother in public. In front of his clients, his friends, the pastor. You ruined him, Brooke. We did not raise you to turn on your own family. And there it was. One last time the lever aimed at me now instead of Tyler. After everything we did for you. The same sentence that had emptied a coffee can and sold a cabin and forged a name dressed up one final time as a mother's wounded love. And the strange thing, the freeing thing was that it had no weight anymore. For 32 years that sentence had been able to fold me up small, and standing in that room with my grandfather's letter in my hands and a whole town having just watched the truth. I felt it pass over me like wind over a fence post. It did not move me at all. My mother turned on her heel and went, expecting the way she has always expected that my father would follow her out the door, the way he has followed her out of every door their whole marriage. He did not move toward her. He just stood there, looking at the floor in the empty side room of a wine bar, an old man who had finally not followed his wife out of a room and who could not undo a single one of the years he had. It was the most my father had ever given me. It was nowhere near enough. And somehow sitting there, it was still something, and I let it be that, no more and no less. I got up. I found Lorna and Danielle out in the cool air by the door, my grandmother leaning on the younger woman's arm, and I took Lorna's other arm in mine. And the three of us walked out of that place together into the fog, and behind us, the consequences of everything that had been said in that room were already starting to move faster than any of us knew. The consequences came the way weather comes in our part of Oregon, not all at once, but steady settling in over the following weeks until the whole landscape looked different. The investors walked first. They did not make a scene about it because the kind of people who have money to invest do not make scenes. They simply stopped returning Tyler's calls. The two men he had owed from the first company, the ones who had stood in that bright room and watched my grandmother hold up a dead man's signature and call my brother a thief, decided they were not going to hand him a second chance after all. Within 2 weeks, the relaunch was over. There was no new company. There never really had been a company, just an image, and the image had broken in front of the only people who could have funded it. My brother had bet everything on one room, and the room had seen him, and that was that. Danielle left him before the month was out. I do not know everything that passed between them, and I have never asked because some things belong to a person alone. But she came to my house one afternoon with a box of her things in the back of her car and asked if she could sit on my porch for a while, and we sat, and she did not cry, and neither did I. She had a child to think about, and a conscience she was done folding small, and she had decided which version of her life she could live with. The woman I had once had so wrong, the quiet one on the edge of the room, turned out to be one of the bravest people in this whole story. She had everything to lose by warning me, and she did it anyway. The bystander had become family, and she still is. She comes for Sunday dinner now at my house, the real kind, the kind with food on the table. Gail found me at the farmer's market. I had gone back to my Saturday market the way you go back to a place that hurt you carefully, half expecting the averted eyes. But the first person I saw was Gail at Pat's lavender stall of all places, and she came straight to me, no hesitation, and she put her hand on my arm. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Your mother told us a story, and I carried it, and I repeated it, and I had you on a prayer list for the wrong thing entirely. You showed us the truth that night, and I believed the wrong one for too long. I am sorry, dear." "You're not the only one who did," I said. And I meant it kindly, and I let it go, because I have watched too many people spend the rest of their lives clutching an apology like it was the prize, and I did not want that. Pat handed me my bundle of lavender set aside again, the way it always used to be, and that small thing the lavender saved for me again told me more about how the town had turned than any apology could have. My job was never really in danger. When HR followed up on my brother's call, they did exactly what a decent office does. They looked at my 15 years of clean work, and they recognized a sad family situation when they saw one, and Renata told me the whole thing had been quietly noted and dropped. "He's coming for your job," she had warned me. He never got close. The one thing that was fully, undeniably mine stayed mine, and I went on doing it, helping people like Earl the groundskeeper understand the futures they had earned steadier at it than ever, because nothing sharpens you like having had to defend your own competence to the people who should have trusted it most. And the account. My account. The transfer that had been hanging there pending, flagged for a signature that did not match, never went through. I made sure of it properly with the plan the way I help strangers do every day. I changed what needed changing. I chose my own beneficiaries in my own hand, and not one of them shares a last name with the people who tried to take it. And I sat at my kitchen table one evening, and I took out the spiral notebook, the 99-cent one my brother had called the sign of an unwell woman, and I turned to a fresh page, and I started logging good things again. A contribution. A raise. A Sunday with Danielle and her little one. The notebook had survived everything the way I had, and it was filling up with a life again instead of a defense. Tyler texted me exactly once after the relaunch. It came on a gray afternoon, and it was so perfectly him that I almost laughed. "Hey," it said. No apology, of course. "Can we talk about maybe a short-term loan against the trust?" Just to bridge a gap, family helps family. I looked at it for a while. And I thought about a sentence my family had used on me my whole life, the one my mother had used about the coffee can and the cabin and the retirement, the one that turned every theft into something soft. You'll call it a loan. They had always called it a loan, the things they took right up until everyone forgot there was ever supposed to be a paying back. "No," I typed when Tyler asked. Then I deleted it because he was not worth even that. Instead, I typed a single name, the name of a good financial counselor in Eugene, a real one, someone who could actually help a person learn to manage a life instead of spending other people's. I sent the name, nothing else, and I put my phone face down on the table, and I did not pick it back up. My mother tried for a while to rewrite the story around town. That is what she does. It is the only tool she has ever really had. But it did not take this time. Too many people had been in that room. Too many had seen the steady hands behind the tears the way Gail had. A story only works in a town like ours until the truth walks in the front door, and the truth had walked in on my arm in a dead man's coat. And here is the thing I noticed sitting on my porch one evening as the fog came down off the hills. I was not angry anymore. The anger had carried me through the worst of it, and then somewhere in those quiet weeks it had set itself down, because anger is a thing you carry for a fight, and the fight was over. What was left was not anger. It was room, space in my own chest where the bracing used to be. I was free. Lorna came up to my house the next week. She was moving slower than ever that night at the wine bar had cost her, but her eyes were clear, and she took my hand in both of hers, the way she had at her kitchen table, and she pressed something cold and small into my palm. It was the brass key, the cabin key, dark with age, worn smooth at the loop. "Go put your hands on it again," she said. "It's still standing, that cabin. The folks who bought it kept it up. It's still there on the river, right where Walt built it." She closed my fingers around the key. "It's still standing, honey. So are you." A few Sundays later, the fog burned off early for once, and I drove out to the Mackenzie. I want to tell you how my mornings go now, because the small things are how you know a life has changed. I get up in my own house, the one I own free and clear, and I make the good coffee, and I sit at the kitchen table where the spiral notebook lives. It is mostly good things in there now. A contribution, a Sunday dinner. The date Danielle and her little girl came up, and we put in a second row of tomatoes along the porch. I have framed Walt's letter and hung it by the window where the morning light hits it, the 2 pages of his blocky printing, and most days I do not even read it. I just like knowing it is there, the words a dead man left me when no living one in my family would say them. That Sunday, I picked up Lorna in Eugene, and we drove the river road together, the brass key in my pocket. I had called the people who bought the cabin all those years ago, and they were kind about it the way river people usually are. They said, "Come on out, stand on the bank as long as you like. The place is yours to look at any time." So we went. The cabin is still there. Set back from the water, the white pines behind it gone even taller than I remembered the porch my grandfather built still holding. Somebody had patched the roof in the years since kept it up, and that mattered to me more than I expected, that the place had been taken care of, that the thing Walt loved had not been let go to ruin, even after it slipped out of our hands. I did not go in. I had not come to take it back. That surprised some people when I told them later that I had a dead man's signed paper in a frame on my wall, and I did not go to court over a cabin on a river. But I had thought about it for a long time, sitting on my porch in the evenings, and I had decided that fighting for the building would mean handing my family years more of my life, more lawyers, more rooms. They could try to control more of my Sundays, owed to people who had never deserved a single one of them. Oh, no man your Sunday. My grandfather had not left me that cabin so I could spend the rest of my life chained to it. He had left me the proof of who I was. I already had that. The building was just wood. So Lorna and I stood on the bank, the two of us, the water moving past fast and cold and gold in the morning light, the way it has moved past that cabin for longer than any of us have been alive. "You going to fix that roof?" Lorna asked. I laughed, a real one, the kind that comes up from somewhere deep. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I'll just look at it for a while." "Your grandfather would have liked that," Lorna said. "He always said the looking was half the point." We stood there a long time not talking, just looking, and I thought about everything it had taken to get to that quiet bank, the folder with my name on it, the slides, the forged B that loops the wrong way, the transfer pending in the dark, the casserole on my porch, the prayer list, the steady hands behind my mother's tears, my brother's hand on my cart, my father's mouth opening in a bright room and finding nothing inside it. And I want to be honest with you, the way I have tried to be honest the whole way through, because this is not a story where I won. You do not win against your own family. There is no winning when the people who were supposed to protect your future are the ones with their hands in your pockets. I did not get a triumphant ending where my parents understood what they had done, and we all healed and sat down to dinner. My mother is still telling her version to whoever will listen. My brother sent me one text about a loan and nothing since. My father has called twice, and we talked carefully about nothing, and maybe someday it will be about something, and maybe it never will, and I have made my peace with not knowing which. But I kept what was mine, and I put down what was never my job to carry. And those two things, it turns out, are worth more than winning. My whole life, my family told me a story about myself, that I was the emotional one, the difficult one, the one who needed managing. He's good with big decisions. My mother said the night this all began about my brother, about my future, as if the biggest decision of my life belonged to anyone but me. And standing on that bank with the river going by and my grandmother's hand in mine, and a dead man's words framed in my kitchen window 20 miles away, I finally knew the truth of it. Turns out the biggest decision was always mine to make. The quiet out there used to frighten me a little. The aloneness my family was always so concerned about, the woman with the whole house and nobody to share it with. What does she even need all that money for? But standing on that riverbank, I noticed that the quiet did not feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like mine, hard-won, fully owned mine, the same way the house is mine, and the account is mine, and the future is mine. No landlord, no one on the other end of the phone who can take it. Oh, no man your Sunday. So here is what I have learned, and I will give it to you plain, the way Walt gave it to me. Being managed is not the same as being loved. If the only time someone shows up for you is when you are useful to them, that is not family doing its job, that is a hand reaching into your pocket while it pats you on the back. And the people who protect your future, without being asked, an old woman in her dead husband's coat, a sister-in-law who picked up a phone, a grandfather who wrote it all down years before you needed it, those are the ones who get to stand on the riverbank with you when it is over. If someone in your life only shows up when you are useful, that is not love. It is management. And you are always, always allowed to take your life back. That is my story. One folder, one forged name, one cabin on a cold river, and a grandfather who showed up louder from the grave than anyone in my family ever did while they were standing right in front of me. If this reached you, if you have ever been the careful one nobody took seriously until the moment they wanted what you built, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one. Brooke's story isn't really about a stolen retirement account. The account is just where a much older wound finally became visible. What it's truly about is the difference between raising children and ranking them. Somewhere along the way, Brooke's parents decided one child carried the family's hopes and the other carried its needs. Tyler was the one worth investing in. Brooke was the reliable one, less a daughter to be cherished than a resource to be drawn upon. That ranking didn't begin with a forged signature at 32. It began with an emptied coffee can at 12, justified with 4 small words, "You weren't using it." And here is the sobering part. Her parents never saw themselves as cruel. They saw themselves as practical, even loving. That is how favoritism survives in good families. It wears the clothing of reason. So what can American parents take from this tonight? First, fairness is harder than love. Most of us love all our children. Far fewer treat them fairly because fairness means noticing the invisible arithmetic underneath our own decisions, whose struggles earn sympathy, and whose earn a lecture which child we worry about and which we simply rely on. Children feel that math long before they can name it. The reliable child learns love must be earned through usefulness. The favored child learns consequences are for other people. Neither lesson serves them. Second, honesty is owed in both directions. A family that keeps secrets to avoid conflict slowly forgets how to tell the truth at all. And third, see your child for who they truly are, not the role that's convenient for you. When we label a child the difficult one or the easy one, we stop seeing the actual person in front of us. There is an old spiritual truth under all of it. We reap what we sow, not as punishment, but as consequence. Brooke's parents spent their daughter slowly over 30 years, and one day there was nothing left to draw on. Yet she chose not revenge, but peace, keeping what was hers, and putting down what was never her job to carry. If these reflections speak to you, subscribe and walk this road with us here on Blueberry Revenge. And ask yourself tonight in your own home, who is being loved and who is merely being relied upon?